and Madame von der Leyen wants to save the planet with our money. This is madness. This madness will be stopped by people of common sense. We Republicans, we people of common sense will restore Europe. Thank you, Madam President. Dear leftists, China is laughing. China is laughing at you. Russia is laughing. India is laughing. You know why? Because of your eco-madness, because of your eco-God. We are responsible for 7% of pollution of the globe, when China is responsible for 30%, and Madame von der Leyen wants to save the planet with our money. This is madness. This madness will be stopped by people of common sense. We Republicans, we people of common sense will restore Europe, rebuild Europe. It's your fault, communists. It's your fault. Illegal migrants, it's your fault, communists. Eco-God, it's your fault, communists. So do not be like communists, be like Poland. We're gonna give you another King Sobieski very soon. We're gonna restore Europe. We're gonna rebuild it. So do not be like communists, be like Poland. Thank you very much.
A fiery speech inside the European Parliament has once again ignited a major debate across Europe about climate policy, economic priorities, and the future direction of the continent. The comments came from Polish member of the European Parliament Dominik Tarczyński, who delivered a blunt and passionate critique of what he sees as the European Union's misguided approach to environmental policy. His remarks, directed largely at political groups on the left, reflected a growing frustration among many politicians and citizens who believe Europe is carrying an unfair burden in the global climate debate. During his speech, Tarczyński argued that Europe's current climate strategy risks damaging its own economy while having little meaningful impact on global emissions. His central claim was simple but provocative. While European leaders impose strict environmental regulations and costly transitions on their own industries and citizens, the world's largest polluters continue operating with far fewer restrictions. In his view, that imbalance creates a situation where Europe weakens itself economically without actually solving the global environmental challenge. To understand why his remarks resonated with many viewers, it's important to look at the broader context of international emissions. Countries such as China and India have rapidly expanding industrial sectors and significantly larger carbon footprints compared with most European nations. Meanwhile, the European Union represents a relatively smaller share of global emissions. Critics of aggressive EU climate policy often point to this disparity as evidence that Europe cannot single-handedly solve the climate problem through domestic regulation alone. Tarczyński's speech captured this frustration when he claimed that other global powers are laughing at Europe's policies. The message behind that statement was that while European industries are burdened with strict environmental targets, competitors abroad may gain economic advantages by continuing production with fewer limitations. For supporters of his viewpoint, this creates a serious strategic risk for the continent. From this perspective, the issue is not necessarily opposition to environmental protection itself. Rather, it is a concern about how climate policies are designed and implemented. Many critics argue that environmental strategies must be balanced with economic realities. If regulations become too restrictive or too costly too quickly, they could lead to factory closures, job losses, and reduced competitiveness for European businesses. That concern has become especially relevant during a period when many European citizens are already struggling with rising energy prices and economic uncertainty. Across multiple countries, households have faced higher electricity bills, increased fuel costs, and broader inflation. When people experience these pressures directly in their daily lives, debates about climate policy quickly become more than abstract political discussions. Tarczyński's comments also targeted the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen, whose administration has strongly supported ambitious environmental initiatives such as the EU's Green Deal. The goal of those policies is to move Europe toward climate neutrality through energy transition, renewable investments, and stricter emissions standards. Supporters argue that these policies position Europe as a global leader in sustainability and environmental responsibility. However, Critics like Tarczyński believe the transition is being pushed forward too aggressively and without sufficient consideration of economic consequences. They argue that European leaders sometimes present environmental policy almost as a moral mission rather than a practical strategy that must account for geopolitical competition and economic resilience. In his speech, Tarczyński used sharp language to express his disagreement with that approach. He suggested that what he calls eco-madness risks turning climate policy into an ideology rather than a balanced policy discussion. For supporters of his argument, this concern reflects a broader fear that environmental activism is increasingly shaping political decisions in ways that could undermine Europe's industrial strength. One of the reasons this debate has become so intense is that climate policy touches almost every sector of modern life. Energy production, transportation, agriculture, manufacturing, and housing are all affected by environmental regulations. When governments introduce sweeping reforms in these areas, the impact reaches millions of workers and businesses. Supporters of Tarczyński's position argue that Europe must be careful not to move faster than the rest of the world in ways that weaken its economic foundations. They believe environmental protection should remain a priority but must be coordinated globally rather than imposed primarily on European industries. Another important theme in his speech was the role of national identity and political culture. Tarczyński praised Poland as an example of resilience and independence in the face of ideological pressure. He invoked the historical figure John III Sobieski, who famously led forces that defended Europe during the 17th century. By referencing Sobieski, Tarczyński was symbolically connecting modern political debates with historical moments when European nations defended their sovereignty and cultural identity. For many viewers, that historical reference was meant to reinforce the idea that Europe's strength has always come from its nations, their traditions, and their willingness to stand firm during moments of crisis. In this context, his message suggested that Europe must once again rediscover that spirit of determination. The broader political message behind his speech is that a movement of common sense, as he described it, is emerging across the continent. This movement includes politicians, voters, and commentators who believe that policies should prioritize economic stability, national sovereignty, and practical solutions rather than ideological goals. Whether one agrees with his rhetoric or not, it is clear that the climate debate in Europe has entered a new phase. The continent is trying to balance several competing priorities at the same time: protecting the environment, maintaining economic competitiveness, ensuring energy security, and preserving social stability. These challenges are particularly complex because Europe operates within a global system where other major powers do not always follow the same rules.